Well, first, I had the impression that what we knew about Afghanistan was not exactly the entire reality, and that if the Taliban or the insurgency was growing up so much, it was not only because Al-Qaeda was working them up. And so I thought money may be an issue to understand what was going on. And so the investigation started very easily. I went to the Donors Conference in Paris in June 2007, and I interviewed people about where was the money going. I interviewed a guy from USAID. I interviewed USAID.
USAID, right?
USAID, I'm sorry, USAID. And, made some statements that they had built or helped build 600 schools in Afghanistan. And then I flew to Afghanistan and decided to do a little reality check. And one of my first things was to call up the local antenna of USAID, and ask them if I could visit the schools.
Right.
And it took me 2 weeks, and there was none.
Right.
None. In Kabul. I mean, so they told me, no, but they're in rural areas. And problem is the rural areas is dominated by insurgency, so you think twice before going there.
Right.
And what I witnessed in Kabul was that the kids were actually going to school outside. And it was the beginning of the winter, and the snow was falling, and they were basically sitting outside with the snow falling, and with like many coats, 4 kids on the bench of 2. And basically, when you communicate all over the world saying that we pour billions of dollars in a country to rebuild it, you are at struggle to find where the money is going to, the people who needs it.
Right, so about $18 billion was committed to, quote, rebuild Afghanistan. So you're on the ground, you see in Kabul, there's no evidence of that money actually getting through. That's a reasonable large chunk of money. And, of course, not to diverge here, but we're seeing something similar in the Haiti operations as well. The military arrives, a lot of aid supposedly gets there, and then people on the ground are saying, where is the money, where is the money? So this is like a backdoor payoff to military contractors, apparently, and they're just not getting on the ground. It's not getting to the people. Now, the film is called On the Dollar Trail. Where did the trail of missing $1 billion lead you? So it's obviously not getting to the people, but where is it going? I have my speculation, but let's hear what you're talking. What's your conclusion?
Right after doing this investigation about the money for the schools, which seems to be really a primary need in Afghanistan, people on the ground told me that there was a neighborhood, a brand new neighborhood where they called it the cake houses were built, and where you have very nice villas. I mean, at least to the aesthetic standards of this area of the world, but really luxurious, like $1 million villas, and then all neighborhood was being built, literally running. We filmed people running, building those houses. So there was a stark contrast between the non-existing schools that the Western countries were communicating about all over the place, and the reality of this luxury neighborhood that no one talked about. And it was quite difficult to film, I must say, because we were threatened, and because basically they belong to warlords, and people were very close to power. I'm not capable of saying that 100% of the aid money goes into the pockets of the warlords and the people around Karzai, or Marshal Fahim is actually the guy who diverted the most money out of the national budget. But it's obvious that a big chunk of it has been used to go into the pockets of the privileged of the regime.
Well, I mean, the money is coming from, it's on the dollar trail. These are U.S. dollars. They're coming from the U.S.
And Europe.
And Europe. But why would we assume that their conception of rebuilding an area would be different than their own conception in their own home country? In other words, in America, this huge wealth disparity exists of the privileged 1/10% of Goldman Sachs bankers that basically steal the country's wealth. They live like kings, and everyone else has their face down in the mud, and they're living like, paupers. And so this country is merely mimicking its own experience in its own country in Afghanistan. Why would we expect America to behave any more in an egalitarian fashion when its own country is a total shambles like this, and the economy is completely being dominated by shysters and defense contractors for their own privileged top 1/10 of 1% elite?
The thing is, I'm not capable of saying that America is responsible for the way the money was stolen in Afghanistan. My feeling is that they would have preferred that the money would have been used more rationally, and because basically when you do that, you just help the Taliban.
Sure, but if there was no Taliban, there would be no trillion-dollar American defense budget, and there would be no wealthy defense contractors and Pentagon officials living near Washington. So they need the Taliban. You know, it's a symbiotic relationship. America's not interested in getting rid of the Taliban. Those are the foot soldiers in their model of wealth and confiscation. So it doesn't make sense that they're not interested. In other words, and also in Afghanistan, the poppy crops have never been higher. And the U.S. has had a program of eradicating drugs as part of their war on drugs. And yet here they are in Afghanistan, and the poppy crops are never been higher. And that, of course, we know that they use those crops and the heroin to fund the CIA and these other groups that are involved as well.
I don't know about that, really. It's something, what you say is something that people should be able to prove. And so far, and I read closely about the opium production in the Middle East and in Afghanistan, and there is no proof of what you say. I think there is some elements
the proof is in the price, and the price has never been cheaper for smack and heroin in New York and around the country because there's huge supply, which is coming from Afghanistan, and the U.S. is there. So the proof is in the price. And clearly, they're the guys running. But let's talk again about the money. You're talking on the dollar trail. There's these build-out of huge luxury villas. And so apparently this is where the money is going, is to service this luxury villa market.
Oh, probably not only. And the luxury villa market is also probably funded by the drug money, because some of the equation is very simple. The place where the villas were built, it was public land. It was given for, I think, $300 a plot to privileged people of the regime by mostly Maréchal Fahim. And in a matter of months, people started building $1 million houses on this land. They earn $1,000 salaries from the Afghan state. So it's quite easy to calculate. It's impossible to build those villas if you don't have let's say an extra resource coming from somewhere else that is impossible to track, since the anti-corruption unit doesn't exist. Was actually run by a guy who had spent 3 years in prison for heroin selling. So it's the counterpowers, the monitoring powers do not exist in Afghanistan. So therefore, there was like we call it in French radio trottoir. It's the sidewalk radio, meaning the rumor of the people who say, well, the money comes from the aid, from also from bluffing the Americans about their needs in terms of military needs. The warlords over-evaluated what they need, so they got a lot of millions of dollars to pay for men that didn't exist. There are various ways of getting money there.
So the aid workers and people in the aid business are coming under increasing attack because the locals, where the aid workers show up, realize that they're being used in this way as fronts to funnel illegal money. Is this a growing problem?
Yeah, there is a lot of my feeling, and that's what the Afghans told me, some Afghans told me, is that because of this inequality, because of this form of violence for them, they turned back to the Taliban. They hated the Taliban. I mean, all of them, they were fed up with, the strict regulations of the Taliban, and they were happy to get rid of them. But they say, well, at least there was some kind of moral sense about them. And so a lot of poor Afghans are turning towards the Taliban. And for me, it's a direct effect of this stealing of money.
Right. So the policies in the region, primarily orchestrated by the U.S., is a way to build the Taliban forces. And they're doing a good job doing it, and the Taliban forces are getting stronger. So clearly the policy of the U.S. in Afghanistan is not to diminish the Taliban or even to diminish what they call terrorism. It's clearly geared toward building the terrorist threat as a way to keep their military occupation in place. So now, unfortunately, on the ground, on the level of the actual Afghani, they're suffering tremendously. And you see this most prominently in that one case study of the schools and the school build-out. The schools, they're just this idea of a nation building, which a lot of times focuses on schools. There's no evidence of that at all, as far as what you saw on the ground in